Attention.
Good morning. We'll just give a few seconds for people to join us. Okay, I think we're good to go. Good morning as always, and welcome to the latest in our series of cybersecurity webinars from Nostra. My name is Gary Byrne. I'm the Managed Services Director here at Nostra. As always, we'd like to thank you for joining us again today, both attendees from our previous webinars and also people who may be joining us for the very first time. For anyone who couldn't make the previous webinars, they are available as always on Nostra's YouTube channel, and we will share links with you after today's session. In every webinar, we discuss the importance of a multi-layered approach to cybersecurity. We also always discuss policies and frameworks because, as always, they're the very backbone of any good security posture. In the last webinar, we took another look at Microsoft 365 security because in Ireland over the last few weeks, we've seen a massive spike in terms of phishing attacks over the past few weeks. Today, we're going to move on to the subject of preparing for security assessments and particularly penetration testing. One of the key ways of knowing how secure your IT environment is to have it tested. So we're going to go through that today. These sessions are best when interactive. So any questions you have, there is a chat section, there's a Q&A section. Please post your questions in there and we'll handle them for you. And as always, we will leave time at the end of today's session where we'll deal specifically with Q&A. We will be recording the sessions and we will send on the recordings and slides to attendees afterwards. So again, I'd like to welcome you all again today. And at this point, I'd like to hand over to our Head of Security and Compliance, Gary Melvin, who's going to take us through today's webinar.
Good morning all. Thanks for joining us this morning after the bank holiday weekend in particular. So the reason we're running today's session is we do a lot of penetration testing for our customers, and then we also work with customers who have penetration testing done by third parties. So what we're going to do today is bring together some of the common findings from the penetration test, and then try and educate our customers and how to prepare for penetration testing. And the reason we want to prepare for penetration testing is because we can get more value out of the test than when it's done. Because penetration testers will usually keep going until they find some elements. So as always, we're going to start off with the security fundamentals and the fact that security is a journey, but doing the basics right will get you in a really good position. And these have been probably on all our webinars so far. Whether you run for firewalls, it's making sure they're up to date, they have a valid cert, and they have MFA for remote access. That is something that comes up in our penetration test after a while, and we'll see that finding probably quite a lot. We do Nostra Cloud Shield, so this is all around securing Office 365. So 90% of breaches that we see start off in email. So the Cloud Shield service from Nostra is designed to harden and secure your Office 365 environment, and then also harden and secure the endpoints that are there as well in terms of your Windows 10 and 11 endpoints. Making sure all our customers and people we work with have immutable backups. So if the worst does ever happen, you want to make sure that all your critical services are covered by a backup that can't be deleted. So we use the data immutable backup, and we back up both all servers and data in Office 365 as well. So a key component to any disaster recovery, business continuity is knowing that your backup is there when you need it. Security awareness training, we're going to cover that a little bit today as well. In 2025, the times we're in now, it's not just systems that get attacked, but users are also targeted and attacked. So securing the user is now just as important as securing the systems. So making sure we're educating the user of what's happening out there. And finally, and one that's coming at you probably hard and fast in 2025, is retiring and removing legacy systems. And we're going to talk about that again today as well. So it's your server 2012, it's your Windows 10 is coming into life now at the end of this year in October. So making sure there's plans in place. So keeping the network clean, and what we always say, if it's on the network, it needs to be kept up to date. And if we're running legacy software, then that can't be kept up to date. So that's where we start all the webinars. It's around doing the basics well. And if we do those, we put ourselves in a good position going forward. So penetration tests, and this is a question we get quite a bit, is why do we need to carry out a penetration test? And there's plenty of reasons for it. So sometimes it's regulatory or an audit requirement, which is a good reason to do it. It is recommended practice for security because IT systems always change. So somebody will change a configuration setting, stuff will happen. There will be something on the network that you're not aware of. So carrying out a penetration test will allow you to get a full report or a health check of where you're at. Uncover unknown exploitable vulnerabilities. If you'd known about them, you would have closed them off. So a penetration test would sometimes uncover something that you didn't know about that can be easily exploited, sometimes not so easily exploited, but exploitable all the same. Part of a continuous improvement program, such as under ISO or another information security management system, and then oversight. So it's a good thing to do anyway. So carrying out a penetration test gives you a sense and a point in time check to make sure everything is as you think it is. And it allows you to have that report for your board, for an external auditor, or for a regulator. So making sure that that's there and that you carry out the actions against it. So there are a couple of the reasons why. There may be other reasons, such as after putting in a new system or a change, but there are some of the reasons why penetration testings are carried out. So there's lots of different types of penetration tests. Today we're only going to cover three. We're going to look at the external penetration test. So this is what can be seen from the outside looking in. So every organization connects to the internet, and at that point where you connect to the internet, that's where you get an IP address from a provider such as Magnet, Air, Cyro, and that point is where your internal network connects to the internet, and that is scanned multiple times a day, hundreds of times a day. So you need that piece to be very secure. So that external or gateway penetration test does a review from the outside looking in to see what it can see. Most organizations have multiple points where it connects to the internet. It might have multiple offices, and then it would also may have servers in a data center somewhere. So all of those needs to be scanned. And when you get an IP address from your provider, you probably get more than one IP address. So all the IP addresses need to be scanned. So that's your external or gateway penetration test. That's one of the bigger ones. So you don't want any vulnerabilities on where you present out to the internet, because bad actors will, from the outside looking in, will be scanning that all the time. So you want that squeaky clean and nice and secure. Then we've got a web application penetration test. So this is where you're using a web application, typically facing the internet to allow your user to work away. This may be hosted. Your Office 365 is a web application, so you go to access your SharePoint or access your email, but there is other line of business web applications, and making sure that they're tested as well. And not all web applications are equal. Some have billions of dollars of security at the back of them. Other have tens of dollars of security at the back of them. So making sure the web application is tested and it is secure as possible. And the last one then we're going to look at is the internal penetration test. So this is what happens if somebody gets onto your network. So if a bad actor gets onto your network, what potentially could they get access to? In an ideal world, if somebody gets onto your network, they shouldn't be able to get access to anything. And that's where the whole industry is going in terms of zero trust. You're trying to treat everything on the internal network the same as you would with an internet connection. And that's how things will progress over the next while. So there are the three different types. We've got our external, outside in. We've got our web application or application penetration testing. And then we've got our internal, which is looking at the internal network. All three good exercise to get done on an ongoing basis. And then we look at how often should these be carried out. So typically they're carried out on a yearly basis. So typically we see external and internal and carried out on a yearly basis. They're also carried out after any major change. So if you're to swap out or you think about putting in a new ISP or a new internet provider and a new firewall goes in, ideally the external is reviewed again after that, because essentially you've just changed everything. If you put in a new system internally or you've made significant changes internally, it's no harm to have it redone internally as well. And then as part of the implementation of a new web application. So some of the guys on the call in terms of ISO will go through a full process if a new web application needs to be introduced to an organization. So there's multiple reasons and multiple schedules of when they get carried out. When a penetration test is done, then the findings are usually classified into critical, high, medium, low, and advisory. So anything that's critical represents severe vulnerabilities and vulnerabilities that could put the organization and data and security at risk. So these are recommended to be tackled fairly quickly after the penetration test. Then we've got high, which may not have immediate danger, but typically when left can get to critical. And then you got medium and low. So over time, some of the ones at medium will move up to high, and then some of the ones at low will move to medium if they're not closed out. So these are the findings. So when you get a penetration test report, most organizations will look at closing out the criticals and highs very quickly, and then have a longer term plan against the mediums. And whether it's an internal, external, or web app, they're all classified typically the same way, and that's how they run. So we're going to look a little bit more on the external, or what I call gateway penetration test. And the reason it's gateway is because it's your gateway to the internet. So it's your external penetration test. So this is based on what can be seen from the internet gateway or multiple internet gateways. There's also, as part of this test, any information available online about the organization is also used. DNS records are used, so we have to keep DNS relatively up to date. So if you do a DNS search or DNS dump for an organization, nostra.ie, it'll give you a list of services associated with Nostra. So typically they will be checked as well as the IP addresses that we will give the third-party penetration tester. So the internet IP addresses, the range for each of our office locations will be given, and then they would use the DNS records. They'll also go to the internet and see what else is available out there. As I was saying earlier, published services to the internet get scanned constantly from different locations, and we see that all the time. So we will see hits from firewalls saying that it's been scanned from all sorts of different locations. So geo-filtering on firewalls is a really important piece to do in terms of internet gateways. So if we don't need to be publishing services or have services available outside of Ireland, then geolocation rules can be set up there. So internet-facing gateways and firewalls can be in your headquarters, your sub-offices, and your cloud environments such as Azure or AWS. The ideal situation you want is that nothing is open to the outside world. So if you want a very secure setup, then you shouldn't have anything open to the outside world from your organization. So where your servers and data sit, you would hopefully have very little open to the outside world. That's not always possible because we wanted to do remote access or we wanted to do publish a CCTV service. There's always some things that that some people want published. But ideally, you will want to have it as minimum as possible, and target is to have nothing open to the outside world. End users are also a target. So end users are easier to hack than systems, so they're now more targeted than the firewalls and the systems. When you think about the amount of scanning that happens, if you have something open to the outside world, it is very easy for an external scanner or a hacker, cyber criminal, to know what version of platform you're on, and that gets locked into a database. So as we get into an era where AI is being used and more artificial intelligence is being used, if there's constant scanning, more information is taken from those systems that's stored in a backend database, And if there's a vulnerability associated with that system, then they will know straight away where those systems sit. So if we have a SonicWall firewall, Fortinet firewall, Palo Alto firewall, and we have something published to the outside world, such as a remote access SSL VPN or whatever it's going to be, it is possible for those scanning systems to take the version that it's on, store it, and if there's a vulnerability published or 0-day vulnerability in those systems within the next couple of months, they'll know exactly where to target. So that's where we're kind of trying to get to having at least open to the outside world as possible. Coming back to the end users, they are a target. They are more targeted now because they're easier, because it's easier to hack a user than it is to hack a system. And as such, users are now part of the test. So most external penetration tests will now include a social engineering where someone will try and ring an end user and get them to give access to a system. And typically that has more success than trying to break through a firewall. So unless there's a vulnerability in the firewall, attacking the user or testing the user will give access to systems quicker than trying to come through firewalls. So the external one is quite important. So remote access is common to be open using HTTPS. So a remote access gateway or a VPN SSL VPN gateway, which is the HTTPS VPN gateway. This can be seen from the outside, includes the type of the firewall, which is said. Remote access service is not secure by default. So over the last couple of years, every major version of firewalls had issue with this SSL or VPN technology. So there is issues with VPN, there's issues with SSL VPN, there's issues with client VPN. It is a technology that is flawed and is continuing to and will have other issues going forward. In order to secure, and there is a whole movement away from SSL VPN, and we'll be publishing another webinar on that in a couple of weeks' time. So in order to try and secure VPN as much as possible, it requires a cert, it requires strong passwords, and requires multi-factor authentication. Having all those three in place puts you in a good position, but making sure multi-factor authentication is on every user that's enabled for VPN is a must. Firewalls, VPN gateways needs to be up to date all the time. Password rotation is much better than a set and forget password. So making sure strong passwords are in place and they are rotated or controlled with a password management system. What we mean by that is that they're integrated with Active Directory or they're integrated with a password management system or a policy that will automatically require strong passwords, might force a change after a certain amount of time, and will have the user disabled if the user is disabled in another system. An end user can be the weak link in any security program, so making sure the passwords are managed by policy and have strong passwords is a very important part of remote access. So common findings in terms of an external penetration test. I'm going to start, there typically two of them here is around VPN. So the second one is having 443 that is typically open. That can be open for two reasons. It can be open for administration on a firewall, which it shouldn't be, and then it's open for SSL VPN. Once it's open for SSL VPN, you have to make sure, ideally, it is geo-restricted to where you want local SSL users coming in from, and then also that it has MFA in place as well. The third thing on that is making sure that SSL VPN doesn't allow users to the whole network and it's limited just to what they need to get access to. So being more zero trust on users and services coming through the SSL VPN. And that is a little bit of a change, but something that's well worth doing. The bottom one is making sure there's a cert on it. So making sure that there is a published certificate, that it is associated with your organization, and your users are not getting a prompt to say this is an insecure connection, and they just get used of making sure to come in, to hit the VPN gateway, everything looks fine. If they do ever get a man in the middle attack, then it'll pop up to say it's not secure. If we don't have a proper cert on it from the start, they'll be getting that all the time and they just get used to it. The last one then is around email. and it's around DMARC. So DMARC is a DNS policy setting that pretty much tells email servers on the internet that if your email did not come from this list of servers, do not pass the email and do not send it. This stops email being spoofed from your organization. So this, as of last year, this was only in place for around 6 to 7% of organizations in Ireland. Microsoft in the next couple of weeks are actually changing how to handle this. So I think as of the end of May, if your DMARC records are not up to date, Microsoft won't accept your email. So if anyone is looking at their DMARC records or has any questions on DMARC records, just contact us. But over the next couple of weeks, if they're not up to date, email will stop dropping. And this is a security element for email that can easily be put in place. So that is a finding out a lot of penetration tests as well. And the reason it's a finding out of it is because it's used. So if a security analyst looks at it and the DMARC record is not up to date, they can sometimes use that to get access into an organization. So some actions from the external pen test. Where possible, don't publish services through the firewall. So be very limited on what you publish through the firewall. If you need remote access, question what it's need for. If you can move that service to the internet and a cloud-based service on a cloud-first strategy, then consider doing that. If you do need remote access, have it for a 10 down number of users. Ensure that it's protected with MFA, strong passwords, and geolocated just to the locations that you need it from. Limit access to only selected systems. So if you're going to do remote access, don't let them access to the whole LAN, and they only need to come in for one access to a remote to an RDP server or to a file server. Just give them access to that, because if that credentials get compromised, it makes it a lot harder for the bad actor to get access to the network. Segment services like CCTV onto completely separate networks or DMZ, demilitarized zone. So don't have services such as CCTV on a LAN beside your servers and publish through the internet gateway or firewall, because these devices, like access control systems and some other systems, are notorious for getting compromised. So making sure that they're completely separate. If there is no services published through onto the internet, then your external pen test will be completely clean. And that's where you want to get to. So what you want to get to is a clean pen test, but that means having nothing published. If you do need to have stuff published, then there's a list of stuff that needs to happen with your remote access and also with other services like CCTV. Our advice is not to publish web applications from your office. If you need to do a web application, publish that through Azure, AWS, or somewhere that is specifically designed for publishing web applications and will have web application firewalls and other elements that can be used as part of the service. So that's pretty much everything on the external pen test. Hopefully you've got some tips from that. Now we're going to move on to web application pen testing. We're only going to do a slide or two on this. So this is for web applications. So we all use web applications, whether we have a list of them or not, but they and all applications have vulnerabilities. So every web application has multiple components. So it might have a database, it'll have a web server, and then in the code that it uses, typically the code that it uses is made up of multiple components that are part of the code. A common thing we see on this was some of the Java components that has had issues over the last couple of years. So the reuse of components, and one of those components has an issue like log4j, then that has an impact on lots of different applications. So components, part of the application, can also have vulnerabilities. Platform code and module reuse is very common. So if there's certain modules written for logging like log4j, for doing database functionality, there's lots of reuse in terms of platform and code. There is an organization called OWASP that was a not-for-profit organization that publishes the top 10 most critical web application security risks every couple of years. And the new list is due out this year. So over the next month or two, a new list is due out. So when web application testing is done, they're usually done against these top 10 risks. So this is what was considered the top 10 most vulnerabilities or the top 10 security risks in web applications. So if we take the 2021 list, this is around broken access control. So we see this all the time in Office 365. We see the ability for a session token. So when a user logs onto a web application, it takes their username and password, it converts that to a token, which is a long string of characters that's stored in the browser, and then it doesn't have to log on again. So if that user comes back after a couple of hours, hits refresh, they can get back in. And you will see that yourselves in multiple applications that you use. Once you log in once, it doesn't always ask you for the username and password again. And that's because the browser has stored what's called a session token or a cookie that will allow you access. And this broken access control allows bad actors to actually lift those session tokens and use them on different machines. So they don't have to have your username and password, and we see that quite a lot. Cryptographic or encryption failures, the ability to capture information as it travels between the app, the ability to inject, use an application string and inject data in, or hijack the pieces of the application. So in terms of web application, they're not going to go into it too much today, but there's quite a lot in it. They're not secure all the time. So at the point of release, they probably are secure, but modules inside them have vulnerabilities. They become known over time. The underlying software, such as databases, web applications, or web servers, always need to be kept up to date. So there's quite a bit in applications, and then those web apps need to be tested. But in terms of web apps, there's a couple of things that can be done. That making sure the components are kept up to date all the time. That is your databases, whether that's SQL, Oracle, or Progress SQL database. Your web service is keeping up to date and making sure then that the code or the software components are kept up to date as well. Where you can consume as a service, it is always up to date. So rather than purchasing a once-off on a web application, if it can be consumed from the provider as a web service, and part of that agreement is it's up to date all the time, then it's much, much better off. And then implement strong access controls and authentication methods. So when we invest a lot of time in the likes of Office 365, we're having our users log on, we're putting in conditional access rules to enforce MFA, only allow them log on from Ireland, force them to put in MFA every day. Then you can actually tie in your identity into a strong identity platform like that. So those, when you're doing an application, maybe check to see, can it be used single sign-on with Office 365? Then you have one user to manage. So at this point in time, if you have one user to manage and they're stored in Office 365, that means you can do your remote access based on that user, do your log on to the computer based on that user, and do your log on to your web applications based on that user. Then you can focus all your time and effort making sure that that is as strong as possible. If that user does leave, it means you have one place to disable the account, and then you can ensure there's strong passwords and everything else against that user. So web applications, it's quite a big area. We're not going to cover in too in depth, but it is a big part of penetration testing, and you will see probably more and more of it as well. So our last one, we're on to the internal pen test. So this is where a attacker or your tester has been given access to the network. So for internal penetration tests, typically you will give a penetration tester access onto your network to simulate that an attacker has got a foothold onto the network, and you'll want to see what can happen if they do get onto the network. So a user has clicked on the link, a piece of malware has gone down onto a machine, and now they have access onto the network. So what could potentially happen? The tester will use tools to gain access to different systems. They're going to try and work across the network in order to see if they can get access to all the data on the network. They're going to obtain an IP address from your DHCP server. They're going to scan the network. This is going to find everything that's on the network. They're going to identify what's on the network using fingerprint in software that will tell them exactly what it is. So it'll say, this is a printer, these are the ports that are open, this is an Active Directory server, this is a file server. And then they're going to in particular check for legacy systems that may be vulnerable to a known vulnerability or weakness, and exploit legacy services to gain access to usernames and passwords. So typically, the penetration tester is going to try and get access to once they're on the network, they're going to try and get access to a system that will allow them get access to a username and password. Once they have access to one username and password onto a desktop, and any desktop will do, they'll have the ability then to dump usernames and passwords from that system to give them access to the complete network. So the goal of an internal penetration tester is to get access to the whole network. And that's essentially what they do. So they'll try and exploit fundamental flaws in legacy systems and also known issues in Microsoft technologies to get them where they want to be. So some of the things that allows a penetration tester, and also it's to simulate what an internal hacker will do, is some legacy support for legacy items in the Microsoft operating system. So one of those is SMB. So SMB is a file sharing protocol. It's been around since 2013. It is now disabled from 2019 in Windows 10 and 11. But if there's legacy systems on the network, SMB version 1 can be used in order to gain usernames and passwords. So if we need to turn on SMB version 1 to support any legacy file sharing use of and sometimes we do get these requests, we get them to say, oh, the scanner is not working. We've put in a new scanner, it's not working. And then SMB version 1 is turned on the server, and that leaves the whole network open to being compromised by in this way. So sometimes some of these stuff gets turned on to make something work, and then there can be an issue. Microsoft Active Directory is around, probably remnants of it, definitely is around 20, 30 years, I would say now at this stage. The technology that was there 30 years ago is still supported in Active Directory today. So this Microsoft legacy network protocols that supports name resolution, how machines find each other on the network, that's all still enabled on Windows servers and Windows desktops today. So some of that stuff allows a bad actor to actually get onto the network and gain usernames and passwords across the network. It's not needed anymore, but it needs to be turned off. It is turned on by default. So what happens is someone will come on, they'll use IP version 6, which is a newer version to get an IP address. It'll go onto the network. It can communicate with clients. And some of this is probably more technical than we need to get to. But essentially, there is stuff that needs to be turned off on every Windows network in order to make it secure to prevent an attack. And this also is the tools that are used by penetration testers when they're testing the network. So essentially, they want to get onto the network. They want to use this newer version of IP version 6. A Windows 10 client will come on. If somebody's given out IP version 6 addresses, it'll communicate with them first because it's the newer version, and then they can start getting usernames and password hashes and being able to communicate across the network. So essentially, for internal penetration testing, there is network hardening that needs to be done prior to testing. And it's not just prior to testing, it's to secure the network. So everything in a Microsoft environment, whether it's Office 365 or Windows servers or Windows desktops, needs to have certain backward compatibility settings turned off in order to be secure. But in order to turn off those backward compatibility settings, we need to remove legacy systems and applications out of the environment, because if we turn those off, stuff stops working if we're using older technology. So this is some of the findings. Operating systems, if there's an unsupported or legacy version of Windows, then the network is prone to attack, very easily attack. If there's unsupported versions of database systems, then they can be compromised as well, because the authentication on those is completely different than it is today. Making sure account log settings, default credentials across systems, legacy network protocols. These three is what legacy network protocols, SMB signing, IPv6. These three are what allows a attacker and also a pen tester get a foothold on the network very quickly, and they can be turned off. Using high privileged accounts on user devices. If a bad actor gets access to a user device, they can dump the usernames and password hashes of the last number of users that have been on that device. So if a high privileged account has logged onto that device, then dumping the username and password hash. And a password hash is a version of the password that is what's called hashed. It's not encrypted. It's changed so it doesn't look like the password. It's ran through a function that gives it a big long version of the password, but it's the exact same password hash. If you run a password through a MD5, if there's different password hash technology, it'll be the exact same result and out the other side. So you run password password 1, it'll look the exact same if you make a hash of that password. So there is a full database of password hashes. So if somebody can dump password hashes, then they can get to it. They can reverse engineer password hashes. Domain administrator, account management, making sure domain administrators don't log on, and making sure password policies are strong. So one of the biggest things that can be done to protect organizations is making sure we have nice, strong passwords. And those passwords are of a certain length. And you will see, I think the latest recommendations for passwords is 14 characters, but just not change them as often as what it used to be changed. And we are getting to a situation where we're not going to be changing passwords unless there's something wrong with a password. Not quite there yet, but definitely getting there. So essentially, on the internal pen test, removing legacy versions of software and doing some network hardening puts everybody in a good place. And these are the exact same thing as to protect us from attacks on the network. So retire legacy systems. So legacy systems prevent security hardening. So we can't do security hardening if we're running older versions of legacy systems and applications. Segment the network. Don't allow access to between network segments. So if we have a segment for Wi-Fi, a segment for IoT devices where we have our CCTV, access control, all that untrusted stuff, have it off on its own, and then turn off or disable legacy components on Windows systems. So anything for backward compatibility on Windows systems, turn it off. Disabling IP version 6 if it's not used, because if it's not used, we don't need it on. If it is on, it can be used to allow a bad actor or a pen tester. And pen testers are there for the good, but they do the exact same stuff as a bad actor will do. And that's how we find out if our network is vulnerable. We get a pen tester in, they will run these, but they're trying to mimic what a bad actor would do on the network. Implement strong password policies and lockout thresholds. Don't remember cached passwords on machines. So this is the issue that we talked about, where someone gets access to one machine, they can dump out whoever's logged on in the last while, along with their password hashes. There's a setting that can limit that just to one. That means you can take your machine home and you can log on with your passwords and you're not having to talk to a domain controller. That's what allows you to log on to that. And then knowing what's on your network and keep it up to date. So these are NAS boxes, printers, wireless. And some of the stuff that we talk about is trying to keep everything up to date. And the way we keep everything up to date is making sure we have policies in place, but then also that we're checking that using vulnerability scans. So we've two ways of doing a vulnerability scan. If a pen tester comes onto your network, they will do a vulnerability scan because they're trying to find the route into the network. So if they do a vulnerability scan and they can see that there is critical vulnerabilities, on this one we can see there is a critical vulnerability. There's one critical vulnerability. It's on a Linux box. There's multiple other vulnerabilities. So if there is critical vulnerabilities, then they can be used. So cyber essentials require and dictate that critical and high vulnerabilities be remediated within 14 days. So we're getting into a cycle now where we want to keep vulnerabilities down and try to remove all critical and high vulnerabilities. There's two types of vulnerability scans. One is the network vulnerabilities scan that scans the network. So anything that's on the network will be picked up. So that's going to be NAS boxes, printers, pretty much everything. Second type of vulnerability, a lot of you'll see coming in, and vulnerability information will now be coming in. You'll see it in your Office 365 environment. So as we turn on Intune and Defender for Endpoint down onto your devices, we get a huge amount of information on the device itself that a network vulnerability scanner won't always pick up. So because this is an essential and agent down on the device, it starts feeding into Office 365 and starts giving you an exposure score to see what is on our devices that typically has vulnerabilities. So what we'll start seeing then is if we have WinZip or vulnerabilities in Java or vulnerabilities in different versions of Office, and we'll see these reports coming back at us as well. So having both of those in place and acting on them and keeping everything up to date. So over on the right-hand side, it's telling us what to do. 28 devices that need Adobe Acrobat updated, media players that probably can be disabled or removed, JavaScript that on Adobe Acrobat that can be disabled. So there's a lot of good information here that can be given. WordPress is on a couple of devices, so they'll be sitting on servers. And there's a lot of good information coming from out of Defender and Intune to give us really good information down on the devices. So the conclusion, preparing for penetration testing will result in a much higher value of a penetration test. So if you can close off all the easier stuff for the penetration tester, they will try and push it harder to see what else is there. There is a specific list of actions that can be carried out from the external, the web app, and then also for the internal, such as hardening. And combining this with vulnerability scanning puts organizations in a really good place and makes sure then that they have actually moved the dial in terms of security, and with vulnerability scanning, continue to improve it going forward. So that was quite a bit, guys, that I've kind of shared with you. Has anyone any questions on that? I'm conscious I've been talking there for the last 40 odd minutes.
Gareth, thanks a million for that. And as you say, listen, heavy enough subject, but really, really important and sometimes overlooked. If anybody has questions there, please post them in Q&A, post them in the chat, and we will deal with them. Gareth, just in relation to the web application testing, how much more are you seeing that now? Like over the last few years, we've had a big drive within the industry for integration, linking systems together for efficiencies, which have massive benefits. And, in traditionally, you would have had the internal and external penetration testing. How much more is this web application testing taking over these days? And what should people be looking for within their own environments to think about the things that need to be tested?
A lot of providers, so if organizations are using a off-the-shelf web application, the provider themselves would probably have done a pen test and then make that available to them. Yeah. And then so you're not going to have too many issues in the web application. So you're hoping the code is good and all of that's good. What then you have to worry about is your management of the identity piece. So making sure that's tied into Office 365 as our Active Directory, and that is MFA, it is geolocated. So, and then it's only to a certain group. So you can do quite a lot by integrating it. So what we're seeing an awful lot more of is organizations are putting the effort into the Microsoft Cloud Azure Active Directory piece, putting all their conditional access in there, making sure it's tied down as tight as it can be, and then tying the applications into that. And if they consume the application as a service from the internet or a hosted service, then they're typically in a good place.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We have a question in from Michelle Daver. And Michelle, thank you very much. Will Nostra run penetration tests for its clients?
So typically we don't. So we can, but typically we'll work with other penetration testers to run them across our clients. What we prefer to do is do the hardening, do the vulnerability scanning, and put the clients in a good place, Michelle. So we would rather actually talk with you and sit down, right? This is what a pen tester is going to do. You're on a Windows network. You have these three legacy applications. So these are going to be found as issues in a penetration test. We have options? We can segment them. We can retire them. We have this legacy system. It is going to have an issue. Sometimes we just can't get rid of legacy systems. It's not always as easy as ripping it out and going to the cloud. There can be reasons for not getting rid of it, but typically we'd rather work before and after on the pen testing. But we do run pen testing for quite a number of customers, but typically they aren't our managed services customers. And sometimes we would rather do the other work.
And I think that's a point well made. Within Nostra, we have multiple divisions. So we've got our traditional IT managed services division, we've got our security division, and we've got our compliance division. If you're not using us for IT managed services, well, then absolutely we do have and can be running penetration tests for you. Question in from Fergal O'Hart: how much is your attack surface reduced by going full Entra, so getting rid of Active Directory?
Massively, because it gets rid. So we're Active Directory, 30-year plus technology, huge amount of backward support. If we can take that out of an organization, then your attack surface has reduced significantly. So it's a massive difference. There's no longer servers there to be attacked. So it's chalk and cheese. Yeah, it's a big difference for everyone. So if we can go that way and tie our applications into Azure Active Directory, then massive difference in terms of security.
Thanks, Gar, and thanks, Fergal and Michelle, for those questions. Gar, question in from Larry Farrell: how do we ensure comprehensive coverage of all potential vulnerabilities? What level of access do the pen testers have? How do you handle sensitive data during the testing process?
So there's a few questions in that. So to ensure comprehensive coverage on vulnerabilities, it's using an up-to-date vulnerability scanner. So they get updated pretty much all the time. So there's two types of vulnerability scanners. Then there's one that does an authenticated one, which has the ability to see onto the operating system and see what's on it. And then the unauthenticated one that just goes off and checks the network to see what's there. So if a penetration tester will be just running an unauthenticated scan, so they won't see everything down onto the operating system. But what they will look for is they'll look for access to a system, and all they need to get is access to a system. If they can get access to a system where an administrator has logged on previously, then they probably will be able to get an administrator log on for the whole network, and they will have access to all the data on that. And that's what you want to try and find out. So it's very hard. If you want a penetration tester to do their job, they will probably get access to the sensitive data. The way you stop that is making sure that your administrator and the accounts that they could potentially get access to, and this is an attacker in the same vein, is that they don't have access to that sensitive data. So that sensitive data needs to be protected and restricted, and making sure then that nobody can get access to other than the people that need access, and that includes your administrator accounts that are doing your day-to-day admin. So there is a little bit in that, but it gets you thinking about what are my critical data and services, who has access to them. Typically your IT admins won't have access to them, and that way you're restricting it.
Fantastic. Gar, thanks a million, and Larry, thanks a million for that question. Okay, folks, so listen, we're going to wrap it up there. Just to say, the next webinar that we have is going to be, we're scheduling it for May the 8th. We are going to look at the importance of immutable backups. So we talk about backups a lot, and we talk specifically about immutable backups. So we're going to talk more about what they are and why they're absolutely critical, again, in the battle against cyber attack. We actually have another question in here, Gar. I just see it coming in. We'll take it. How much disruption or performance impact can we expect to production systems during penetration testing? And what can be done in advance to prevent it, especially with firewalls running security services such as Sonic Walls?
Two types of penetration testing. So typically the penetration tester will take it to a level where he can compromise an account, but is not going to delete data to do any disruption. So you shouldn't see very little disruption during a pen test because for the most part, now there's two elements to this. Sometimes the security tools will start locking down services. So for the most part, you shouldn't see any disruption. But if it's done in a slow, stealthy way, and some pen testers will come and ask you to say, can you whitelist my IP address on your firewall so it doesn't start blocking and locking stuff down? So sometimes the security tools will have an impact. And I know we've actually seen our security tools completely lock down servers during penetration testers in our customers, and that was an automatic response by some of the security tools. So when a penetration tester was scanning the network and trying to run something on the server, it actually locked down the server and took the server off the network. So there can be a disruption, but if everybody knows the pen test is happening, and that's kind of a trade-off, making people aware as well. Typically, there's very little disruption, but there can be disruption depending on what's running on the servers.
Gareth, thank you. And another question there, can a video of the next webinar be made available if I'm unavailable to attend due to prior engagement? Yes, absolutely, to that attendee. All of today's webinar and every webinar we've done to date is available on Nostra's YouTube channel. So please log on to the channel, and there is a link sent after each of these sessions there. It'll be sent over to you as well, so you'll get access to it there. All future webinars will be recorded and will be available in those channels as well. Okay, listen, thanks again to everybody. We've just posted it up in there in the chat. The 8th of May, we're going to look at immutable backups. The slides will be sent to you after today's session. Any questions or queries, please reach out to your Nostra account manager. And if you don't have a Nostra account manager, please reach out directly to myself. My email address is gary.byrne@nostra.ie. Gary, Melvin, thanks again for that. Really appreciate it. Folks, have a great day and thank you all. Bye.
Thanks, guys.